Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to another episode of the Peace Podcast. I have another special guest, and you know I love bringing my special guest on. And this message is something that you're going to want to listen to. So this podcast is titled Just Save My Relationship, whatever that looks like. And disclaimer, we can't promise that Bryan can save your relationship, but he sure does have a lot of tricks to help you try. So our guest today is Bryan Power, and he is an integrated attachment theory coach. And he spends his time helping others who are struggling in their relationships to help them turn their situations around. And he teaches them how to turn failure into success and ultimately have the greatest relationship they've ever had before. And he does this by coaching and speaking and sharing all the tools. And so, Bryan, thanks for being here, and let them know where they can find you.
Thanks for the introduction, Karey. I'm pretty excited. That sounds pretty impressive. But no, if anybody wants to find me and learn a little bit more about me and what I do, you can go to my website. It's called makeyourrelationshipfail.com or myrelationshipfail.com. And you can hear a little bit about, you can see a little bit about my story, check out some podcasts, and all that good stuff. And then actually, when you're there, take the free attachment style quiz. And we'll actually talk about joining the personal development school as well, which is really another great thing I think you should do. And I'll give you a free session when you do that. So go to my website, do some of this stuff. You can check it out. I'll give you a free session. Love to chat with you and see if we can turn your situation around, get you on the right track.
And just to make it super easy for you, those links for the website and things will be in the show notes. So if you scroll down to those show notes, you can just click right through and you can access all of that information. So, Bryan, we got to talk. When your relationship fell apart, which I'm sure you have some stories about, what was the most surprising truth that you discovered about yourself?
Wow. Boy, so many, so many. But the first thing I think I learned was that I had a lot of issues still that I thought I'd overcome, right? And thought I'd move past a lot. But, I know I came from a pretty rough childhood, if you will. And, it's been a challenge, throughout my adult life, trying to have good relationships and everything. But, my wife and I had been together at the time about 8 years, and I thought we were pretty good at the time, but things really started to go south seemingly pretty fast, right? Looking back, I can see there were some red flags, but at the time it seemed like overnight we went from pretty good to like things were falling apart. And, but the first thing I definitely realized is that we have to take ownership of ourselves and how we're showing up in the relationship. And so I think it's so important that because we always think it's the other person that has the issues, right? And that was the first thing I think I learned is that it's never just the other person. It's really both parties probably have some situations that they're doing improperly. But whether they are or not, we have to look at how we're showing up. And are we showing up properly 100% so that we're able to have a really good relationship? And when I looked at myself in that situation, I knew I was okay, but I was definitely not near what I thought not near what I've learned I could be now and all the tools that I have today. But I didn't know any better, right? It's just it. We don't know it until we know. And unfortunately, sometimes it does take a failure, a breakup, a hard situation to kind of get us to wake up and start making some changes and be willing to humble ourselves, and willing to change, right? And learn and accept that, I maybe need to do some work on myself and not continue to point the finger at everybody else. But yeah, that's a good question. There's so many, I think, answers I could do for that one.
Yeah, and I think especially when the process is long, right? Like when everybody looks at the thing that broke the relationship, but it's like if you're trying to fix it and mend it and heal yourself and all the things, like that process is so long. So that it's like if the process is long, there's so many lessons that we could talk about that are inside of it. And so it's hard to just pick one and then when you look back at the you that you were when the relationship fell apart, you're like, yeah, he didn't know anything. And for me, I was like, she didn't know anything. Like she was just not doing this right.
Yeah. And with that, real quick, while you say the process is long, I agree. This is a lifelong process, really, but you can learn and make some really great changes in a pretty short amount of time. When you're hungry enough and you're ready to make those changes, you'd be surprised at how fast you can really, learn, change, begin to change things, and things can start to turn around. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of hope on that, not feeling like, oh my God, it's going to take forever to get some changes and do all this. No, you can see some really dramatic changes pretty quickly. Now, with that said, it's an ongoing process. It's not like we can go to the gym for a couple of weeks, get in great shape, and then never go again, right? We want to make it more of a lifestyle where now we're practicing this on a regular basis and we're implementing the tools that we've learned into our daily lives with our spouse, if you will, and our all relationships. We're doing it on a regular basis, and that's the beauty of it. Is just, you just continue to practice, continue to get better, and all that good stuff. But yeah, you can make some really good strides pretty quick.
So what was the thing that made you say, okay, I'm going to make those really good strides really quickly? Like that made you say, I can't keep doing what I've been doing.
Yeah, I mean, for my wife and I, we had so it started off in February of 2024 when she challenged me to get some therapy, right? And then I challenged her to get some therapy because I thought she had all the issues, she thought I had all the issues. It became pretty quickly that we both had some issues there. We began to really get emotionally clash. Even though we were going to therapy, which was kind of helpful, it was also adding a little fuel to the fire because she was really seeing a childhood trauma specialist, was digging into that childhood trauma, if you will. And she was just highly emotional. As she would get triggered emotionally, that would now trigger my fear of abandonment, my fear of being alone. She was kind of questioning herself, her life, all this stuff. And I'm like, wow, what is going on? It just seemed to all be falling apart. And the more it seemed to fall apart, the more I tried to hold on to this thing. And the more I tried to hold on to it, the more she needed to get away from it.
Yeah.
And that began the clash, right? So after about 4 months of that, she would actually seek a restraining order for emotional safety, just because it was so emotionally tumultuous. It was. You look at me now, and I'm pretty chill, right? But at the time, it was it was chaos emotionally. It was
Yeah.
emotional chaos, right? And so
Yeah.
she sought the restraining order. At that point, I knew, at that point, I honestly believed that the relationship was over. I couldn't fix it. It was time to move on. But I was fortunate enough to have come across the integrated attachment theory program about a month before the restraining order came on, and that had a lot of answers. And so as I was learning this stuff, it was a little too late, if you will. It seemed like to kind of stop the train wreck, if you will. But I knew there were answers, and I just decided, even after that relationship was over, the restraining was on, and all that. I wanted to continue to delve into that work because I knew there were answers that could actually
Mm.
help me have a good relationship in the future with somebody. And I just knew that I wanted to be there. I wanted to be able to have that. No idea that it would ultimately be my wife would come around. We have a second chance to kind of turn it around. I didn't do the work to get her back. I did the work to let her go and to really just heal myself so that I can, again, put myself in a good position to be the right person for somebody. And as it would turn out, it would just be my wife coming back where she had done some of her own healing and I had done my own healing. And now we had some new tools that really allowed us to put this thing back together.
Yeah, so you mentioned the integrated attachment theory and how, that's the program that all of your stuff is centered around. And I'm wondering, when your relationship was falling apart with your wife, like what did your attachment look like then?
Yeah, so I mean, I came across a great video by Thais Gibson, Thais Gibson. She did a great podcast on the Mel Robbins show, and she explained the 4 attachment styles. And when I was listening to that, I knew there were answers there. I was like, oh my God. So I was definitely leaning anxious, preoccupied, which is very, very really connective, really wants the relationship, really kind of a lot of closeness, almost people pleasing, sometimes too much. A lot of fear of abandonment, which is a big
Mm.
one for me. That's where really one of my major wounds, if you will, fear of being alone a little bit, definitely not good enough type of thing. So all those wounds, I just saw myself there. I saw my wife was leaning at that time a lot more dismissive, avoidant. She was definitely more isolating. She definitely likes to would stonewall. The way she would communicate kind of fit that pattern a lot more. And then because we were so opposite, I realized like, wow, that's why we're struggling here, because she has a certain way of processing and doing certain things, and then but I mind it is completely opposite, if you will. And
Mm.
so when they're completely opposite, that's creating some turmoil. And so that's really where we were. But I was like, so I was fascinated by that, but at the same time, like I said, it was kind of a little too late as things were just emotionally clashing. I was trying to bring this work up to my wife and say, hey, check this out, but at that point she was kind of just doing her own thing, trying to figure it out herself, if you will. And it just was what it was. But yeah, I just love that work and decided I was just going to continue to delve into it.
So at that point, a lot of people would have said, this is a failure. Like, this relationship is just a failure. We got to end here because we're not going to be able to fix it. So how did you reframe that thinking in your relationship into being able to grow and transform instead of thinking this is going to fail?
No, to be honest with you, I really was letting it go because once the restraining order came on, I thought it was over. I was done.
Mm,
She had told me she'd never be happy with me in her life, and you get those things, right? And you're kind of like, okay, well, she was doing everything she could to push me away and get some space, even if it meant telling me some really bad things, right? So, that was the way she was trying to deal with it. So when the restraining order came on, I just thought, okay, it's over. But I just wanted to continue to heal. I was already, like I said, captivated by the work that I was already learning. So I just thought, well, I just want to keep learning this stuff. Like, I want to know more about it, continue to do my own work and heal and grow. And I knew I'd have a great relationship with somebody someday, or, I knew I'd have another chance. Right. So,
mhm,
I wanted to put myself in a position to be a better spouse for somebody and have that kind of experience, if you will. And I just decided to grow. What else did I have to do? What was I going to do? Like, not grow, just kind of
mhm.
sit there and mope or be miserable or kind of like do all that. This gave me something to work on, gave me some hope, gave me some things to kind of like focus on. I was excited about the opportunity and to learn something that I'd never learned before because these are tools that we just didn't learn and growing up. But yet I didn't have a good parenting. Nobody showed me how to do this stuff. I wasn't able to look and see what a healthy relationship looked like.
Yeah.
I had zero skills in this regard. So this was like I think the first thing that I saw that I feel like the 6 pillars of the program gave me 6 things I could really focus on and begin to work on and start to get some understanding, get some tools, and ultimately that work would pay off. And yeah, it was just like, hey, it was fate, and that was great. But what else did I have to do? I was at a crucial time. I was just humbled by the entire experience. I was kind of broken at the time, and I figured, I've got to do this right. I want to get better at it, and so I saw this as an opportunity to do so.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that a lot of times when we're in that place of despair, we forget that part that you just brought up, which is you're going to have to go through this piece of life anyway. So you might as well go through it by trying to heal and grow and change instead of sitting in the place that you're in, because whatever is your next, whatever is the next part of your journey is not going to happen if you're sitting here. So you're going to have to, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, as they say, and do something with yourself, even if it doesn't mean you're ever going to have that thing back. So I love that you say that because it's true. You're going to have to go through these next 6 months
Well,
anyway. So why not grow while you're doing it?
my Carrie, my line today is they call it a break up, right? Not a breakdown. So if we're going to break up,
Mm,
then I'm going to level up
love that.
from this experience, right? So I'm using this as a break up. So how do
Yeah.
I level up? I have to learn some new things. I have to be open to new ideas. I have to be willing to kind of become a better catch, if you will, and have those skills and different stuff that I do now that allows me to level up, right? And so I just took that approach to say, you know what, this is going to be a good thing for me in the end. It's not going to hurt me. Like it hurts, but you know what I mean. But I was going to use this as a launching
Yeah.
pad to something great, not something that was going to break me. So that was the approach. That's my line. You're free
I
to
love
use that
that.
one.
I love that. Feeling it. So
Stealing it.
if any of our listeners are going through a separation or going through the process of a bad breakup or, feel like they're losing their relationship, what do you feel like was that thing? I know that you said you listened to the podcast, etc., but the shifting in your brain that said, this isn't despair, like there could be some peace in this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know. For me, it was kind of just desperation. It was a
Mm,
gift of desperation, I call it, right? It was like, hey, you've hit rock bottom. Like I lost my family. I wasn't able to see my son for a while. I just didn't, I was so just messed up. I was so like confused by this whole situation. I just needed some
mm,
clarity and something to go for and work towards. And I saw in this program, the things that Thais Gibson was talking about, I saw answers. And so I was excited to just say, okay, well, you know what? There's answers here. And I just continue to put one foot forward and just try to, study a little bit more, listen to another video, do another workbook, just challenge myself to continue to figure it out. And I felt like I was getting better. Yeah, I was getting a little bit better. Time was passing. And you kind of get to a point where you're feeling good about your life again. And you're like, okay, if this is where we're at, this is where we're at. And truthfully, when I had fully let it go, is really when the relationship with my wife began to come back around, right? And so it's in the letting go that allows people to really come back and truly love each other in a healthier way. And so I used to tell my wife, I said, I don't want to fix what we have. I always wanted, I said, I want a new relationship. I want a new
yeah.
one. But it had to, get rid of that old one in order to get the new
Mhm,
one.
mhm.
And the new one is so much different and so much healthier, so much better than what we had before because of the work we've done. So sometimes I think a breakup, if you just do it right, you never know what can happen, and you don't know that, if your spouse
Right.
comes back to you and you didn't do the work, then what good is that? What time that time was spent, in a bad way, right? And so
Yeah.
now you're probably going to end up in the same zone. You're doing the same negative things. You're probably going to have the same problems. But if you can take the breakup and say, okay, I'm going to use this to gain some knowledge, figure out what I was doing wrong, look at my part in all this, see if I can do a little bit better. Now, if you do get the chance to come back to your spouse and things, kind of play that way, you're in a better position to actually have it done right and actually make it work this time. So you don't have to go through the heartbreak. It's nothing worse. There's another line I always say is there's nothing worse in the world than losing this person you love simply because you don't have the tools necessary to keep them. Right. And so
Mm,
we're
yeah.
falling in love. We love each other. How do we go from loving each other to total breakdown of the relationship? And now we're, at the point where we hate each other or something. It's like, it's mostly because of our own wounds and our inability to, to
Mm,
work it through this thing and learn how to do relationships in a healthy way. And so I
yeah.
just think the work that we're doing here is like critical. And I just want to help somebody keep from having to go through what I went through and, hopefully turn it around so that you can have a really great relationship, and you'd be surprised at what you can do and what can turn around. Like I said, my situation was pretty critical. But here we are today. Things are
Yeah.
amazing today, right? So I don't care what it looks like. I don't care how bad it looks today. Don't worry about that. Focus on doing the work, focus on the healing, and then let the chips fall where they may a little bit, and you never know what can happen.
That's so good. And you said something that was, you were looking for answers. And something that I, am a huge advocate of is that there's always a why. There's always a why of the way, why are you acting the way that you're acting? Why is the relationship falling apart the way that it's falling apart? Why is my partner acting the way that they're acting? And oftentimes, like you were just saying, that comes from those childhood wounds, your core beliefs, the narratives that were spoken to you throughout your life, your traumas that you've experienced. And I think sometimes we want to just be like, well, somebody should just accept me as I am. But if the way you are is pouring vinegar into their open core wounds, nobody's signing up for that. So I am like, we have to, if we want answers, we have to assess our own why, because there's a lot of answers in knowing why you do the things you do and what caused you to be the way that you are. Um, so what were some things that you noticed when you started looking for those answers in why you were the way that you were and why you were showing up the way that you were showing up?
Yeah, no, the first thing I really loved what Thais Gibson said was that 95 to 97% of our decisions in life are based upon our subconscious. And that the conscious cannot outwill or overcome the subconscious.
Mm,
And so basically the brain is a needs meeting machine. And so it has subconscious patterns that are running in your brain that you don't even realize are going on there. So even though consciously you think one thing, subconsciously those wounds are
yeah.
playing out in your life and you don't even realize it. And that really was playing out for me. Again, I'll talk about my fear of abandonment. Like had you said before, are you still have a fear of abandonment? I'm like, no, I feel pretty good. I'm pretty confident. I feel pretty, I'm good, right? But then when things really started to fall apart, that's when the weaknesses start to show. That's when all of a sudden the
Mm,
fear of abandonment did get triggered, and all of a sudden, wow, this was a pretty tough spot to be in, and feeling of being unsafe. That's another wound, right? It felt unsafe. I didn't know what was going on, where I was going to live, how was I going to do this thing? Being alone, right? I knew I wasn't going to be alone forever, but at that point, I'm going to be alone for a little while, something, whatever. I'm going to have to kind of deal with that. All those things just start playing out, and that was a powerful statement for me because I realized that was so true. Literally, at one point, I was talking to an ex-girlfriend on the phone while this was happening. My wife, knows I'm good friends with her. She's
yeah,
a
yeah,
terminal
yeah.
cancer survivor. Good friends with my ex girlfriend here, and she said to me at one point, she says, "Bryan, you sound like a drug addict." And I said, "Wow, I
Mm,
feel like a drug addict." Now, my father was battled addiction, and so it just was in my blood, if you will. But that hit me hard, and I was like,
mm,
"Wow, that is so powerful," because it literally was like I couldn't stop the train wreck, no matter how much I consciously wanted to and figured, like it just couldn't do it. And so I realized that those powerful wounds needed to be healed. They have to be worked on, and until we really do that, that's really driving the train and really driving it in a bad way. So as you do the work, though, you begin to heal some of those subconscious wounds, begin to turn them into positive different patterns, if you will, that you're now doing subconsciously. and now you begin to plays out in a different way, that
Yeah,
is powerful.
and I think that we forget sometimes that some of these things are hardwired, hard set in us. So when we are in a space in life where we're in survival mode, we're going to fall back to those patterns, those instincts, those default settings, because it allows us to not have to think about that part because we're just in survival mode. So we're just going to do what feels instinctually and primal to us to do. But when your definition of love looks different because your dad is an addict, which I experienced, and
Mhm.
when your definition of how to get love looks different, because for some people you have to try to earn it or be perfect, then if you're falling back to your default settings and your default settings are all out of whack because of the way that you were raised and the way that you grew up, then those things that are hardwired into you can't be leaned on. They're not to be trusted because they're not the right thing. We have to relearn those things. So when your subconscious is doing the talking and it's not from a healthy space, you're going to do all the unhealthy things to try to get the things you want. And that just doesn't
Yeah.
work when you're dealing with people who are also on their healing journey. They want another healed individual. Like they're not going to just put up with that, you know? Um,
Yep.
so you and your wife reconciled after all of the hurt and that restraining order. So what are some boundaries and practices that you had to put into place or you feel are beneficial for other people to put into place to make your relationship as good as it is now?
Wow. So, I mean, that's a great one. Real quick, though, I want to
Yeah,
touch on the
sure.
6 core elements of the
Yeah.
program because boundaries is one of
Love
those.
that.
Okay. And so, but with that said, very quickly, you're going to work on your core wounds, your needs, your emotions, your boundaries, your communication skills, and your behaviors. And so with
Mm,
those 6 core elements, as we begin to improve on all 6, now we begin to really have healthier, better relationships because now we know how to communicate, work through problems. We know how to really listen to each other. Like that's a big one for us. Like we learned how to listen to each other properly and do all that stuff. And yes, boundaries. I mean, for us, my wife and I are pretty common. We kind of have an ebb and flow. We don't have to necessarily always say a particular boundary like, hey, this type of thing. But especially now, I know if she's looking for space, I just give it to her. She doesn't have to ask for it. Yeah, she
yeah.
doesn't have to say, hey, this is my boundaries as much as I know, like give her some breathing space and
Yeah.
let and move. Don't kind of cross that boundary. They're almost a little bit more unspoken for us, I think, at this point. But the idea to have a boundary is certainly important. So especially when you're dating, you're getting to know people, and if you need to verbalize it, absolutely. Hey, this is something I need, very important to me, and then to see that they show up and don't cross that boundary. And if they do, you have to reestablish the fact that that's important to me. This is
Yeah.
something I truly need. My wife and I just meet each other's needs differently now, and we kind of know each other's vibe a little bit. One of the things my wife does for me is very important to me. I love, like, just snuggling, cuddling, getting a little bit of love and affection, if you will, first thing in the morning. And so a lot of times we'll start our day where she'll just, cuddle with me for 20 minutes,
Aw.
right before we start our day, which before we wouldn't do. But she knows that it really sets my day up right. I feel good starting my day that way. And so that's something that she would do for me now that again, maybe she didn't do before.
Yeah.
That's a really vital thing that, we do, type of thing. So, but all those things are important, all 6 of those pillars.
Yeah. And healing doesn't look the same for everybody. So we experience similar things, but my healing journey looked very different than your healing journey, etc. So to the listeners who are thinking, well, my partner is unwilling to change, they're unwilling to do the work. I don't even know where to begin. How and can they still access peace through this process when they feel like their partner is not making any moves and they really are unsure of what to do themselves?
Yeah, 100%. This is probably one of the number one things I hear all the time, right? It's certainly a top one, right? Well, I'm willing to do the work, but they're not. So then
Mm-hmm.
maybe I shouldn't do the work, or it's like, wait a second, no. Somebody has to do the work. And somebody put it to me this way, and I love this. It's 2 are better than 1, but 1 is better than none. Okay, so when doing the work, if your spouse isn't willing to do the work, okay, that's on them. We need to step up and do the work, take the lead on that. And you'd be surprised at how much things can change by just one person changing the dynamics of that relationship. Because now, when they learn how to set some boundaries, when they learn how to communicate better, when they begin to understand their subconscious wounds
Yeah.
and patterns, and then see their spouse's wounds and patterns, and begin to adjust their behaviors accordingly, and get more control of their emotions. And so when you start doing all that stuff, it's going to play a factor in that relationship. And a lot of
Yeah.
times your spouse will come with you. And if for some reason they stay stuck and they continue to stay really negative and don't grow with us, then sometimes we do outgrow our spouse, right? Sometimes, hey, I've done the work. I've put myself in a position where I want to have a healthy, happy, good relationship with somebody. And if somebody's not willing to come with me on that journey, then sometimes at that point, and I hate to say it, it is time to figure out a different way, right?
Yeah.
Separate for a little while, maybe give it some space, take a serious look is what we're going to do to fix it, because you owe it to yourself to have a good, life and a good relationship. And it's not okay for somebody else to continue to stay stuck if you're wanting to grow past that. Sometimes if that's their choice, then we have to let them make that choice.
Yeah.
We can't force them to do the work, but we have to accept them where they are, and they have to accept us where we go. And that's just the way it works out sometimes. But I would say more times than not, a lot of times, one person doing the work can really change the dynamics of that relationship. And if nothing else, you're putting yourself in position to have a great relationship. What if you're the one that chooses not to do the work and they do?
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden they outgrow you.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they decide to break up with you. And
Yeah.
now all of a sudden they're in a great relationship with somebody else. How heartbreaking is that for you, right? Now you're like, oh man, I should have done the work when I had the
Yeah.
chance. Like, really? What are you flirting with? You're flirting with really disaster and some pain and stuff. Like,
Sure.
don't do that. Don't do that. Take the time now, especially if you're not even at a critical stage. If you can catch this before you get to that
Mhm.
point, great. But no matter what stage you are, if you know there's some work to be done, let's do the work, because it'll benefit you. I promise.
Yeah. And healing isn't linear, but I'm wondering, are the six pillars linear? Like, do they stack onto one another, layer onto one another, or can you kind of work in and out of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can work in and out of them, but the thing I love is you can kind of look at each one and say, okay, I probably need to work on my communication skills a little
Hmm.
better. Okay, fair enough. So maybe I work on that, and then all of a sudden I realize, oh, wait a second, I need to get more in tune with, some of my needs. Maybe I've been not, focusing on my needs as much. So that, and you'll just work through that. But little by little, as you work on each pillar, if you will, you start to see some progress. You start to say, wow, wait a second, I know how to communicate a little bit better. That's awesome. Hey, I know how to,
Yeah.
set some boundaries that I never did before. Wow, that's pretty cool. And I love it almost like I can grade myself a little bit and say, okay, I'm getting a little bit better at this. I'm getting a little better over here, right? I can, I'm getting more control of my emotions, and I'm learning how to kind of use my emotions as information, and learning kind of, how to deal with that. And then I think the core really is going back to those core wounds, though.
Yeah.
I think that's the heart of it. Until we really fix the core wounds, a lot of these
Hmm.
other things are going to be more difficult. So we have to fix the core wounds and then kind of work on everything else in conjunction. And it all just works really beautifully synergistically. As you get to improve on each one, it just multiplies, right? It just turns into something great.
Yeah, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I say this all the time. If you're working on a behavior because that behavior is creating negative results in your life, but you don't access the actual oozing wound of that behavior, the behavior is just a symptom. So it's like putting a band-aid on a gaping hole in the side of your leg. That's going to do absolutely nothing, because now it's infected and it's oozing not just on you, but onto the other people. And I know that's a really gross analogy, but it is the way that it works. And so, um, I watch people do this all the time where they're like, well, I'm going to work on this behavior. Like, I yell too much. Yeah, but why? Why are you yelling? Because if you only work on the yelling and you don't know
Right.
why the yelling exists, then you're going to maybe fix the yelling. But again, when you get back into that primal state and you feel attacked or you're in survival mode, guess what's going to show up? The yelling, because you haven't
That's right.
fixed the thing that caused it in the first place. So
So
go ahead.
yeah, I love that. You're so right. We talk about what's called BTEA, beliefs, thoughts, emotions, actions. And so if I'm emotional about something, that's going to lead to my action. So my action may
Mm,
be yelling and screaming, and everything else. But the emotion is I'm angry
yeah,
because, but then why am I angry? We have to go
yeah,
back to the thought. Well, I'm angry because, this person disrespected me, and then we go back to what's the belief? Well, the belief is I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. Therefore they disrespected me. Now it's causing the emotion. So we have to backtrack that and really look at, again, you're so right. If you're just trying to change the behavior from the outside in, that's a tough one. But you have to
mhm,
get into what's causing that. What are the beliefs and thoughts that are actually causing my emotions and now my actions?
yeah,
And then when we heal that, and that's why I talk about the core wounds, is beginning to heal those core wounds. Because that is the key. Once we heal the core wounds, all of a sudden we don't get as triggered as emotionally. All of a
yeah,
sudden we are able to level off. We may still feel it a little bit, but we're not at a level 10. I love what Tice Gibson says. It's like there's no such thing as really self-sabotage. It's just that the brain, again, has that needs meeting machine. And so if I'm actually, wanting to go to the gym and do something healthy and everything else, but my brain wants to, want some comfort or connection, all of a sudden I'm not going to the gym anymore because
yeah,
I just want to go out with my buddies or hang out with my girlfriend and connect in that regard. So the brain just does what it needs to do for survival, for
yeah.
what it's been told, the way it's kind of on automatic pilot. And that's the key. We got to get in there and dig that out so that we can fix it.
Yeah, and it's trying to keep us safe. And so if we don't tell it that it
It is.
doesn't need to keep us safe the same way that it did when we were 7, it
That's
doesn't
right.
know that we don't need that same protection. And so it's just doing what it's always done, and you have to train it to believe that you don't need that thing anymore. So yeah, I totally agree with you, and that is the type of research that I nerd out on because I think it is so interesting to see, especially if it's interesting for me when other people say, "Oh, well, my dad was an addict," and I go, "Huh, of course we have the same core wound. Of course we have the same,
Mm,
because I feel like it shows up so similarly." And then you start to notice like the connectivity between people, and you're like, "Well, this person acts like this person. That's interesting." And then you start to see like their core beliefs are the same, their core wounds are very similar, and so of course it presents itself this way. Um, so we are nearing the end, but to give the listener some hope, because this is heavy stuff. It's not impossible stuff, but it is heavy stuff. And to give them hope, um, talk to the person who's in despair right now and who is just like, I am at the end of my rope. I don't know what to do. I'm done trying. What can you give them in the way of
yeah.
encouragement?
Man, I know how I've been there. I get it. If you're in that zone, my heart goes out to you because it's painful, it's hard, it can feel very, very lonely, and it's just
Mm,
awful. It's an awful, awful place to be. But I promise you, if you just catch your breath, take your time. Put one foot forward in front of the next. You don't have to think, this isn't going to happen overnight per se, right? So, but if you can just get a little bit under your belt each day, do a little bit
mhm.
more, get a little bit better, and begin this journey of healing. You'd be surprised, like I said, how fast sometimes things can turn around within a month, 2 months, 3 months. In my case, it was 4.5 months. 4.5 months is really nothing in the scope of
Yeah,
things. Like, I mean, it's amazing, and for that type of change in just a couple of months is incredible. And so I just think if you do the work, if you take this time and the mental approach of saying, okay, wait a second, this is a bad situation, but I'm going to use this for something amazing. I'm going to turn this into something great and use this. I always talk about a Super Ball. A Super Ball hits the ground. The faster and harder a Super Ball hits the ground, the higher it's going to
mm,
bounce. So if you're like that Super Ball right now and you're hitting the ground hard and fast, don't worry, you're about to bounce really high if you can focus on that, right? If you can just take that approach, and that's why I call my practice Make Your Relationship Fail. Not that we want it to fail, but we accept that sometimes failure is part of the recipe that actually does help us grow, help us get to the next phase. And that's what it takes. Unfortunately, it takes that failure, it takes that breakdown, it takes this situation of pain and hurt to humble us and to get us to say, hey, you know what? I need to make some changes. I don't
yeah,
want to do this anymore this way. I want to improve and get better. And I promise you, I used to think I was being punished, right? When these things would happen to me.
yeah.
Now I truly believe you're being blessed.
Mhm.
You're getting a
Love
blessing.
that.
You're being given a chance to fix all this garbage that was put upon you.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily your fault that you're this way, but it is your chance now to change that and grow from it and launch into success. So it's not a punishment. It's a chance to grow. And this is a blessing. And it turns out if you do this work, you will be blessed on the other side of this tremendously. And you don't have to stay stuck 20, 30, 40 years in a relationship that's dead and not
Yeah.
great, and you're just surviving, if you will. No, you get to have a chance to have a great relationship. Okay, so sometimes I truly believe hitting rock bottom isn't it's a good thing. It can really be a good thing.
I love that. And our greatest lessons are learned in our biggest failures, even if that biggest failure is a super painful experience. And I can say that that is true for my life. I've seen it be true for the people who are closest to me. Because if it didn't hurt, would you actually go through the process? Probably not. You'd probably be like, well,
Yeah.
let me just go back to this thing because it didn't hurt bad enough for me to make a change. And so it sometimes it has to hurt in order for you to say, okay, I'm not doing that anymore. Like I refuse to repeat that.
Yeah,
So
the key I think with that is don't stay in the hurt. Okay, don't stay
yeah,
in the hurt.
very
It's
true.
okay to feel it, but don't stay there, and accept that. Wait a second, I want to learn from this, and then
Yeah,
and then as you see yourself learning and growing, you're putting yourself at a better chance not to get back there. Sometimes it's two steps forward, one steps back. It
yeah,
does happen sometimes. Okay, but I promise you, if you keep that approach of, hey, I'm just going to keep going forward, even if I get knocked back a little bit, I'm not going to get knocked back this far again. And then you just keep going, getting better, doing the work, and all of a sudden you'll see, like, man, all of a sudden you have tools, you know how to communicate better, you know how to do all this stuff. You're
yeah,
just like, oh my god, this is how it's supposed to be. This
yeah,
is how it's supposed to be. Like,
yeah,
this is
totally.
pretty cool. This, and then you'll be like, this was worth going through that pain. Now, I would
For
say today,
sure.
I'm thankful, so grateful for the experience that we went through last year, because look at what we have today
Yeah. Hmm.
because of that, breakdown, if you will. I'm glad it happened.
Yeah.
It's a blessing.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. It really truly is. I agree with you. And I think that that not staying in the pain, like you just said, but thinking like, what's this pain supposed to be teaching me? Because it wouldn't be here if it's not supposed to teach me something.
That's it. Right.
Is a great tool to use. And also, if you need help processing the pain, working through the pain, or just getting to a point where you're actually out of ruminating in your own thoughts and you need somebody to work with, Bryan is your guy. So I'm going to put the link to access him in the show notes so that you guys can do that. Don't sit in the pain alone. Reach out to me, reach out to Bryan, reach out to somebody who can actually help you, not somebody that you can vent to, although venting is a great tool, but not somebody who's going to let you ruminate in that pain and tell you all the great things about yourself and how you never need to make a change. And somebody's going to, like, there are people who are going to put up with what you're giving out, but there's also a greater life when you start to see why you're acting that way. And we don't want you repeating those same patterns over and over again and going through the same pain over and over again, because if you don't heal and you don't fix what's ailing you, you'll repeat those same patterns with different people with different faces over and over and over again. So reach out,
Yeah.
click those links in the show notes. And as I always say, knowledge gained and kept to yourself is selfish, but knowledge shared with the world could just be the bondage that they need to break free from whatever they're experiencing that's keeping them in that stage of life. So share this message, share it with your friends, share it on your socials, like and subscribe to the pages, and go look Bryan up, because if he can give you this much info in a 40-minute podcast, just think of how much he can help you with if you work with him directly. Thank you guys for tuning in. We appreciate you, and I'll see you again next time.